Morning decisions. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Experience a membership that backs your business journey with American Express Business Platinum. When you pay with membership rewards points for all or part of an eligible flight booked with a qualifying airline through Amex Travel, you can get 35% of those points back, up to 1 million points back per calendar year. American Express Business Platinum. There's nothing like it. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Listening to this podcast instead of doom scrolling? Smart move. Another smart move? Getting help from one of State Farm's 19,000 local agents when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Special reason, what's the lie, cause I ain't leaving. We're in for a very long night. Heard a vicious rumor from your mama's tongue. You a desperate woman, need a man with a gun. High crime zone in the city of lights. Say it please, can you bring it anymore? I beg you please, can you bring it anymore? I'm taking whiskey to the party tonight, and I'm looking for somebody to squeeze. Somebody to play, baby, don't get uptight, baby, please. Wanna see my ID, try to clip my wings, don't have to show you proof of anything. I know the law, friend. I'm going back outside.
What's going on, everyone? It is Jay Scott, and it is The Hook Rocks, the ultimate rock community podcast. Welcome back. Thanks again for listening. We do appreciate it. We are part of the Pantheon Podcast Network, the official podcast platform for Metallica. So check out their podcast on Pantheon Podcasts, as well as all the other music-related podcasts as well. You can find them at pantheonpodcast.com, as well as on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pantheon Pods. And you can do the same with The Hook Rocks. Just search up The Hook Rocks on all three of those platforms, and like, subscribe, or follow us on any podcast platform that you do or have on your phone, any app that you have. Don't forget to download that app to automatic download so you get the latest episodes right to your phone. We've had some really cool episodes recently. We just had Aaron Jones, the great new artist who just finished up his tour with the Rolling Stones. We just did our quarterly album review. We ranked the top 10 albums of the quarter. We also had Wendy Dio talking about the special edition of Dreamers Never Die. And as well, throughout the year, we've had our 500th episode with Dax Nielsen from Cheap Trick, Nita Strauss on our 4-year anniversary, as well as George Lynch, Kip Winger, Rick Nielsen, and Richie Kotzen and more. Scott Gorham and Don Jameson episode was a lot of fun too as well. So check all those out. And it's time again for our annual celebration of the life of Eddie Van Halen. As you know, he passed 3 years ago on October 6th. And it still resonates that he's no longer here, because he had such an impact in my life. You guys know the story that I tell. The first time I heard Van Halen first time I heard Eruption, I was like 7 years old, and I was this young kid. And my brother was at school, and I was homesick. Got done watching The Great Space Coaster. My mom was cleaning the house, and I went in, I grabbed the album, put the headphones on, and that was it. I was done. It was incredible. It was the age of Star Wars, and hearing this Eruption instrumental was just absolutely incredible. And our first year we did this, we had the author, Greg Renoff, who, you know, has written Van Halen Rising and the Ted Templeman book. Last year we had the amazing rock journalist, Matthew Wake, who's a great friend of the show too as well. And this year we've got another special guest who I'm really happy to have. And it's going to offer a different perspective of what Eddie meant to guitar players and the music scene in the 80s in Hollywood. And I'd like to welcome the legendary guitar player of the legendary band LA Guns, Mr. Tracii Guns. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. And I think they're doing military helicopter drills above the house right now. So if I get up for a second, it's because I got to close the windows, right? As soon as we logged in, I heard, I'm like, great.
Well, every once in a while, you'll hear my dog bark in an episode too. So I got him out of the room today. So he's
okay, great.
and I think the mail has already come. So I think we might be good with that. But
okay,
thank you for doing this, man. I appreciate it. Like I said, it's going to give us a little bit of a different perspective because you were there. You were like the in the aftermath of him playing in his first album. And we heard the story how he changed guitar, he changed the tone, and we all heard it. Mm-hmm. But when people say that to people like you and people that lived it as a guitar player, what did that change mean to you?
Well, it was heavy because I think I was 12 when the record came out, and I was on my way home from summer camp in the San Bernardino Mountains, and I was listening to KMET, and Eruption came on. And I was like, what is this? And I'd been playing guitar since I was 5 or 6 years old, and I was at that age, I was ripping. And what is this? And everybody on the bus, I remember, just shut up. They were like, what the hell is this? And then the debate immediately followed. Well, that was keyboards, kind of. And I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think that was keyboards. So, all of a sudden, my brain was focused on Eruption. And then, You Really Got Me came on after. And then, we knew that's how the discussion started, is that, this is a band and this Van Halen and, wow. Okay. So I get home, my mom picked me up, and then I was going to my dad's for the weekend, and we were in the truck, and it came on again, Eruption into You Really Got Me. I'm like, Dad, we got to go get this record right now. And he's like, yeah, okay, let's go. We got it. And that same day, I bought some purple Alva wheels for my skateboard, and it was raining, and I built a half pipe in my dad's living room. So I remember the day I got that record like it was yesterday. And, I'm skating in the living room listening to the LP of Van Halen 1, just in heaven, and I'm like trying to even then articulate what's going on with the guitar on that record, 12 years old. I'm just like, man, God, I got to learn this, like, what is this? And at the time, I was so heavily into Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath that it was a jolt, right? Because Tony Iommi and Jimmy Page were as heavy as it got. It was this was more focused. It was darker, and it didn't have the experimental depth of Led Zeppelin, meaning, there wasn't a bunch of weird overdubs and kind of studio exploration. It was, straight ahead. The guitar was dark. The drums were big and floppy, and David Lee Roth was like, what the hell's going on here? And then, like when On Fire came on and I heard Michael Anthony's voice, screaming so high, it was just like mind blowing, completely changed my, if I was, a motherboard for a computer, like it just got upgraded. That's the best way I can describe it. It's like, okay, I can play the solo to Heartbreaker and Whole Lot of Love and, Iron Man. Now I got to learn Eruption. Like, okay, like level up the whole deal. So I did. And I more adopted his style and sound, than learning anything note for note. I've never been a guy that really learns anything note for note other than some Randy Rhoads stuff, because it's really, Randy Rhoads stuff was, less improvised, you know what I mean? Like more structured. But Eddie's stuff, I knew that it was blues based, and I knew that a lot of what he did came from, rehearsing and jamming with the band kind of feeling his way through it, but he had such a different feel. So for me, it was more about getting that sound and still doing what I already did, but just making it heavier and darker. So that's what it lent to me. And the songwriting was out of this world. It was perfect. It was still along the lines of the Kinks and the Beatles, pop songs almost, in a way, like, stuff that's real broad and anybody can, recognize that the songs are great. It's just that it had this bionic guitar playing, behind it. And beyond that, the little tricky time changes and stuff that Eddie and Alex were able to do, because they had the same DNA, like a little bit later, was just like scary. Like there's some stuff that rhythmically, with the time signature changes that I would never be able to learn, and the bands that I've seen that do those, the cover bands, tribute bands that do it, they kind of get those things right. But I think that, there's something to be said for the DNA between brothers, writing little tricky parts within, a 3-piece, musical band. And, but those things are very, influential, they're inspiring, cause I was writing since I was a little kid and, putting pieces together, for me, I write music, I create music, I don't write lyrics or anything. So it's always a puzzle, every song I write, it's a puzzle of bits and pieces and cool stuff. And, at that time, Eddie was the best puzzle putter together guy, right? It's the best way to describe him.
At that moment, though, you didn't know that he was tapping, right? Because you only heard the music.
No.
And that was such a different approach. When did you discover that was what he was doing?
I discovered it because it was such a phenomenon in LA. They would talk about it on the radio, okay, Eruption. So he's doing this two-handed tapping thing. And I still had no idea what it was, and I remember going into, West LA Music, which was on Hollywood Boulevard at the time. And there was some guy playing Eruption, an old guy, probably 21 or 22 years old, like who's that old guy playing that? They were playing Eruption, and I watched him and then I saw what he was doing and I was like, whoa, all right. Because I never saw Eddie play when I was that age, but a lot of people had, a lot of people had seen Eddie play, the Starwood and the backyard parties and club gigs and stuff. So, guitar players at that age, they were aware of what Eddie was doing in LA because they saw him do it. And I remember somebody telling me, when I was in high school, like after kind of like Women and Children first came out, oh yeah, I used to see Eddie play in the clubs, man, and he would turn his back when he would do that stuff. And I was like, no, he didn't. That's ridiculous, But yeah, the tapping thing, I saw it, and so immediately I went home and I just started going doing, 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 doing. Like it took a long time to get a grasp on what that was, and I kind of knew better, through my early career not to do that because it would be so associated with something that even though Eddie isn't like the originator of it, he's certainly brought it into, public vision in his own way where it's such a signature thing for him to do. And I think he knew that, that's the thing about Eddie. And we'll get into that in a little bit is his self-awareness as a player, and the things that he owned. But, there's just certain things you don't do, and Tom Morello kind of has that thing with, his whammy pedal and stuff like that. You just don't do certain things. You don't overdo it at least because you can't own it because it's so unownable.
Right. Well, you mentioned about, doing what he was doing. There were other people that were doing it. He wasn't the first to do it. Guys like George Lynch were doing it. Stephen Lynch was doing it too as well. Did you know of those other players at that time too?
Yeah, I did. Especially those two guys. And I'm pretty sure that they saw Eddie do that before they did it. George in particular, was right there in the thick of things with Randy and Eddie and Greg Leon. You know, a lot of people don't know about Greg Leon, but Greg Leon was as equal a force in the LA scene as those three guys, you know. But Greg never did that. Greg was just straight out melt your face, man. To this day, you know, I'll never forget watching Greg Leon play. But George, George's thing was, you know, he was in other people's bands, kind of, you know what I mean? So he didn't have the luxury of like, hey, this is my shit, this is what I'm doing, and you know, it was always somebody else that was supposedly the focal. Then George would play and be like, God damn, that guy's a monster. And with Steve Lynch, you know, he was an Autograph, and Autograph was a milder version of all the heavy rock that was happening, and they were great, but Steve didn't get the recognition that like George and Eddie and Randy got, you know. But yeah, there were guys doing it, and you know, I'm trying to stay in my, you know, 13, 14, 15-year-old timeline right now. That's when I saw all these guys play. But yeah, I mean, it really, without Eddie, guitar would not have become as focused, I don't think. You know, that's kind of the difference between Eddie and Hendrix. Is Hendrix was an explorer, you know what I mean? Like, he was taking, you know, blues and soul and horn music and taking it as far as his brain would allow him to go in different directions, you know, and riffs and, you know, the fuzz pedal and things like that, as to where, you know, Eddie had, you know, 10 extra years of other influences, you know, beyond Hendrix. Because there's some early videos of Eddie playing live where, you know, there was big Hendrix influence there, you know. But he was able to focus it, and his sound was so important to what identified Eddie, you know, especially on record. You know, it's just like, whoa, okay, that's Eddie Van Halen. You know, so, you know, he did his homework and his, you know, kind of little scientific brain making his sound. And he pretty much stuck to it all the way through, really.
After you started to hear his body of work with the first album and beyond, we all knew Alan Holdsworth was a big influence on him. But also Billy Gibbons and Eric Clapton when he was in Cream were two major influences of his as well. Did that surprise you, where that stuff came from?
Eddie was a smart guy. And Eddie was the king of knowing what he was going to say about his guitar playing in interviews. Not to narc Eddie out, but I mean, you know, Eddie liked Page, man. You know, he even kind of ripped Page early, you know, like kind of said like, you know, fuck that guy kind of thing. You know what I mean? The Clapton thing was all about Cream. You know, I think some people take it as, you know, fucking Eddie was influenced by Lay Down Sally. No, he fucking wasn't. You know what I mean? And he was into Hendrix, and he was into Iommi. He was into Ritchie Blackmore. You know, he was into the stuff that me and you did. The Holdsworth thing, I think that was a claim, you know, because Holdsworth was a force. You know, he was an extreme force for the technical side of guitar playing, and Eddie was good friends with him, as Eddie was good friends with Steve Lukather. And I would say that I would think, just from knowing those guys, I didn't know Alan, but I think that Lukather probably had a much bigger impact on Eddie than Alan Holdsworth, you know, is playing buddies and stuff like that. I don't hear any Holdsworth and Eddie's playing at all. And, you know, I spent enough time with him where, you know, Eddie's not a fucking nerd, man. He's a badass. Yeah, 100% badass. Trust me.
Getting back to when you first heard it, was there a sense of intimidation of hearing this stuff? Was it like so new that like you were so curious? Was there ever a moment where you felt like, how am I going to play that? It's impossible to play that. Or was it the challenge of trying to figure it out?
For me, growing as a guitar player in my early teens, I was always about atmosphere. It was always about sound, right? I got into the guitar because Jimmy Page played theremin on Whole Lotta Love in the middle section. And I was like more absorbed with that when I first heard it. And then the solo comes in Whole Lotta Love with that really bitey, fuzz, what the fuck is a fuzz tone? It's a Maestro fuzz tone pedal. And it's all about the sound, and if the guy's got soul that I'm listening to with some kind of unique sound or something I never heard before, it's more about reinventing that sound for me. It's always been about, channeling this inspiration and putting it all together for myself, and Eddie at the time, like I was saying earlier, his focus, and so I wasn't intimidated. I was like, wow, that's a giant puzzle piece. Here's another guy that does his own thing that, which I don't really hear a lot of influence other than, the ones that we talk about, Cream, Zeppelin, Hendrix, and Sabbath, and he's the type that really wanted to own his style. Eddie really wanted to be, hey, I'm Eddie. I make funny looking guitars and put, stripes all over them. And I smile and I'm into this and I'm fucking great at what I do, and he always owned that. He never shied away from it. He had a 59 Les Paul hanging up in his guitar room, he had all the right stuff, but he wanted to be unique. That was his goal, was to be unique. And he was. And it was very natural for him. And interesting is that people always give Randy Rhoads a lot of credit for being almost an accomplished classical player, but he wasn't. He wanted to be. He was, trying to get there. And where Randy was very expressive with classical music, those were his inventions taken from, things that he had heard, and he was amazing at it. Where Eddie actually did have a pretty thorough classical music training. But he sounds like a bionic blues guy, and, I always loved that. I'll get into, my relationship with Eddie, coming up here, but, yeah, he was really good at creating a perception of what he wanted the world to think of him.
You obviously talked about Eruption and what that meant to you hearing that. What did you think of when you first heard him, his rhythm playing? Because that's one of the things that I don't think is talked about enough, is how much of an incredible rhythm guitar player he was.
Yeah, that's really the thing. And, we do talk about Eruption and, his guitar solos, but if you really listen to 80% of his solos, they're rhythmic. His guitar solos are rhythmic, and I mean, he might end, a run with a, kind of a thing, that tremolo picking thing, double picking, but he had an incredible amount of soul in his right arm, in his body, all the chunkas, which is really prevalent on Appetite for Destruction. Slash really has that kind of right hand that, is chunka, which is very soulful, and, when you really get down to it, through the first four records, the riffs are pretty simple. They're just real inventive, and his rhythm playing has a lot to do with that attraction to it. It's very, pulls the heartstrings, right away. Where a lot of guys that are great guitar players don't have that. They might be really great rhythm players, but they're not unique. They don't stick out in a way. Like Angus Young is fucking amazing rhythm player, great solo, but great rhythm, and, I think that's what guys like my age and older really absorbed Hendrix, because Hendrix was all about that kind of rhythm, and, you know, muting and, you know, scratching and upstrokes. And, you know, there's always been a thing among teachers that are, you know, 10, 15 years older than me, where you only use your wrist, you know, you don't use your arm. So, when you use your wrist and your right hand, you have a lot more control tonally over what you're going to do over the pickups, you know, with muting and, you know, scratching and plucking and things like that. Eddie's thing was really interesting too, because he didn't rest his fingers on the guitar. You know, he kind of held his guitar pick like a claw, but he was still able to play super funky, you know, which I can't do that, you know, but he did. And I also think that's also what made his rhythm style very unique to him.
What was it like the first time you saw him live?
Fuck, man, that was the first rock concert I ever saw, you know, in an arena. I saw Jackson 5 and Earth, Wind and Fire when I was 6 with my mom, but the first concert I ever went to was the Women, Children, and First concert with my cousin Willie. And he had won, the album had just come out, and he had won Guitarist of the Year, Guitar Player Magazine for the second year in a row. And that's how the show started. David Lee Roth walked out on stage and, I'd like to introduce the Guitar Player of the Year 2 years in a row, Mr. Eddie Van Halen. And he comes sliding down this fucking ramp on stage left, you know, running and then sliding. And he's just, you know, you know, just being Eddie. That was my introduction to Eddie Van Halen live, man. And then they went into it was the fucking, to this day, still blows my mind. It's like, holy fuck, what is going on up there? You know what I mean? It was so impactful and so much energy, like dark energy, man. I mean, I'm just going to put it how it is. That's dark energy. That was like, you know, Sabbath on crack. Just so great, man. So great. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, what an opener. Romeo Delight is one of my favorite.
Yeah, Romeo's Delight. Yeah. Fuck me, man.
Such a badass tune. But as you're hearing him for so many years playing on the albums, and I'm sure like the mystery and the lore is growing, because back in the day, that's what it was really based on, because you didn't have the internet and you only had 5 channels on TV, right? And you just had your radio, and there was like this mystique about these guys.
Well, with Eddie, you know, I mean, he was on the cover of every magazine instantly, you know, and you could read his interviews and stuff. And, you know, I remember the claim, and I talked about this with him too. You know, we were playing golf one day. He goes, "Hey, Tracii." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "You know how old I was on the first record?" I go, "Yeah, 21, 22, something like that." He goes, "I was 25, man." You know, like he was so cool with me, you know, just like, because he knew that he could get a laugh out of me, you know, because you know, we just had that kind of very sarcastic, you know, childlike connection. You know, we had a lot of fun together, but, you know, he did create mystique and created things in the press that he knew somehow had the wow factor. You know, so the mystique was huge. By the time I saw him play, you know, reading the interviews and stuff, you know, I thought he was 23 the first time I saw him play. I'm like, God, that guy's 23 and I'm 17 and, you know, blah, blah, you know, how am I going to be like that by the time I'm 23? You know, all this stuff. But none of that mattered. You know, it was just, it's got to be the only concert where I was just glued to the stage the whole time. Like I'd never seen, nobody had ever seen anything like that. You know, with Roth, with his antics, and, you know, Michael Anthony with the Jack Daniels bass, you know, hitting it with his fist, you know. And I was in the Motley Crue, you know, they were playing clubs and they were fucking great, you know. They had that dark energy too, but not like Van Halen, man. I was like, whoa. And I remember seeing Roth, you know, at those Motley Crue shows. He even introduced them a couple times at the Troubadour And I would just stare at those guys. I didn't even know what to say when I'd see them, like in the bars. I would just be like, yeah, like they fuck a lot of chicks. You know what I mean? Like it was so taboo. I was so innocent in a way at that age. That changed quickly though.
I still remember seeing them live for the first time when MTV had them on the US Festival. I was 8 years old at the time, and I just remember the whole show was mesmerizing. But the crowd was just incredible.
Yeah, I was there.
Oh, that was, it's hard to believe that was 40 years ago this year. And
I don't even want to. Fuck that, man. Really?
yeah. I hate to break it to you, Tracii, but that was.
Yeah. Well, here's an Eddie Van Halen perspective, right? We're talking about that's 40 years ago. I started hanging out with Eddie in the end of 91. And I don't know, how old was I? 20, like just about 26, 25, 26. And Eddie was like 11 years older than me. So he was 37, right? 38. And I'm like, man, he looks so young for being an old guy, right? Like I thought Eddie Van Halen was old when he was 37. We're playing golf and shit. I was like, yeah, man, I'm hanging out with the older Eddie Van Halen. Like that's what you think when you're young. You know what I mean? Now I'm 57. Now I'm 20 years older than he was when I thought he was old. So it's just wild, man. And I think that, playing the guitar, the way that we approach it is kind of like, the Benjamin Button kind of alchemy. It's the kind of magic that just keeps you very immature for some reason. Because, my dad said, I remember walking in the plumbing shop. My dad owned a plumbing shop when we got signed. And I was 20 and I walked in and I told him, he goes, well, this is the last day you're going to mature. This is it. You're going to be 20 forever, if things work out, And he wasn't lying. And, it was funny for my dad to say that because he wasn't the most introspective guy, He was like, oh, well, that's the end of that, kind of thing. But he was right, and Eddie Van Halen was a great example of that. Very much lived his life, his way, did the things that he enjoyed. He's a good guy, man, and, he dabbled a little too much in certain stuff, I guess. I always try to ignore that with my friends, because I don't want to be involved. I don't want to, that's real dark. I just haven't ever gone there, but most of my friends have or do or whatever. But yeah, man, it's always weird, talking about Eddie when he's not around anymore, because when he was alive, if I would have talked about him, like I have this, Guitar World article that Michael Sweet and I did about Eddie. It's on the wall in front of me, and Eddie like wrote some shit on there. I will always tell him, what I mean? I go, hey man, I got a big mouth and I said this in this interview and stuff like that. He always go, I know. Like he was so cool with me. We didn't really have social boundaries with each other. He called me at 4 a.m, after having a couple. What are you doing? I'm fucking sleeping. I'll wake up. Like, why? He goes, I want to make sure you're picking me up at 8:30. I go, not if I don't sleep. You know what I mean? Like, he's just a good buddy like that. It's like, but then, the chemistry of, definitely one of my top 3 guitar heroes, becoming friends with him at that age, it's just like fucking mind blowing. So I had to suppress those feelings. You know what I mean? And I've got to be friends with like some of my heroes and even be in bands with some of them. And it's always, psychologically, you have to put that out of your mind, that this person impacted me in such a heavy way that I can't even make it a reality to be in the same room, let alone, cutting farts in the same car. You know what I mean?
Well, I'll start with this question about your relationship with him. I've always read that he was very welcoming and very warm to guitar players in the community.
Yeah, without a doubt.
What was that like when you experienced that warmth and generosity from him?
It was interesting because it freaked me the fuck out, right? So originally, what had happened was, I wanted him. I had my manager, Alan Kovac, call whoever his manager was. I was thinking about doing that band Killing Machine. And Eddie called me like within 45 minutes of that idea, on my home phone on the answering machine. like, hey, Tracii, this is Eddie. I heard you want to do a record and you want me to produce it or some shit like that. I don't know. Just call me. It was like one of those things, like nobody was in the room. Like, hey, did you hear that? Like I was by myself. I'm like, fuck. So I call him, like, hey man, what's going on? He's like, what are you up to? What are you doing? You got to tell me about this. And I was like, well, blah, blah, blah. And I guess Cocked and Loaded had been out. Right. Yeah. Wait a minute. That's not how I met him. We were rehearsing for the Cocked and Loaded tour. Hold on a sec. Send a voice. We were at Leeds La Mobile out in the valley. And it was a really weird day. Alice Cooper was auditioning guitar players across the driveway. Iggy Pop was looking for a guitarist next door to our studio. And Eddie was working with his buddy, Matt Bruck. Matt Bruck had a band called Zen Boy, and Eddie was working on that down the hall. I didn't know it. But we're playing, and Chief, Mick Cripps, guitar tech, opens the door to our studio as we're playing, and Eddie Van Halen falls in the room. He was listening to us through the door. And I looked up, and he just waves. He's like, hey, guys, and then closed the door and went away. That was my first encounter with him. And I was like, did that really just fucking happen, So anyway, and I asked somebody in the hall, like, what's Eddie doing here, Oh, he's working with Zen Boy down at the end of the hall. I'm like, okay, I'll leave him alone. And maybe it wasn't even Zen Boy. I think it was some band that had a lady singer. I don't remember. But then I walk across. My girlfriend was working at that studio, Paula. And I walk across the driveway, and Alice Cooper's in there, and he pulls me aside. And I go, how's it going? I think I don't know how old I was, 22, still young, just off, just finished recording Cocked and Loaded, getting ready to tour. So, I knew the drummer that was auditioning the guitar players. But anyways, Alice just comes up to me and pulls me aside. He goes, hey man, I know you're busy, but, I wish you could do this gig, And I'm like, me too. I wish I could do this gig too. I'd love to do this gig. And then the next day, Iggy's next door, and he had this guy Whitey playing guitar for him. And he sees me in the hallway. Yeah, I know the Fawn's here. The Fawn. There's Fitz. So Iggy gets me in the hall, and he introduces himself as Jim. Hey, Tracii, my name's Jim. I look at him. I didn't know if Iggy Pop's name was Jim. He goes, want to come in and have a jam? And I'm like, what's going on? And he goes, well, we got this guy Whitey playing guitar, but he's you can't do this tour. So, I want to get a really cool guy like he. And he talks about, I have a documentary that's never going to come out. Maybe it will. But Iggy Pop talks about like the first time he meets me and stuff and sees me play. I didn't know. I didn't know any of these guys knew who the fuck I was. And he's like, man, I'd love for you to just at least do this one tour. And I go, I can't, I got to do this. So all this shit happened. And like, they talk about, these, kind of Native American energy spots, up in the Malibu hills and stuff like that. Well, that day, those 2 days for me, I must have been in one of those Native American energy spots because all this really great positivity came my direction, got to meet these people. And that's the first time I encountered Eddie, was that way, in a very innocent kind of way related to my guitar playing. Which, as a 22-year-old kid, it's just like, well, my ego can't get any bigger than it just did today. You know what I mean? I was like, fuck, okay. I must be an okay guitar player at the minimum, right? Cause we're all fucking insecure as hell, so anyway, so then the thing with, I want him to produce my shit, but he just goes, well, hey man, we're rehearsing at NRG, rehearsal studio. Come down, man. Let's hang out. Well, I'm like, okay. So I grabbed this little Ibanez guitar that I had made that was very similar to his first, what was it? Music Man. We had the, 3 tuners on each side, whatever. I had 4 of them made. And I brought one over there and I go, look, I made this guitar. I had the Ibanez making this guitar. It's a lot like yours. And he's like, holy shit, man. Let me check that out. And he had just got his first, well, in his rig were, the 5150 amps, the first one. He goes, man, you got to plug into these amps, dude. They're fucking killer. Blah, blah, blah. And Zeke was working for him at the time. Zeke was always a dick to me. I don't know why. So I plug in and I immediately play Ain't Talking About Love wrong. I don't lift to the open high E string. I just kind of stay on the F. And he looks at me, he goes, no, let me show you. And he walks up fucking behind me and plays it on my fucking guitar through his rig, like this, lift your finger. I'm like, okay, that just fucking happened. You know what I mean? And, so, it didn't lead to us working together. It led to us being friends. And, so from that point on, he called me like a couple days after. He goes, hey, do you play golf? And I go, yeah, I do play golf. I had lessons and everything. He's like, well, let's play golf. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I started hanging out up at the studio, at his studio, going to play golf in the early mornings and, doing stuff like that. And he was into drinking beer. I didn't. Actually, our foursome, he was the only, I think maybe one of the other guys drank beer. But he drank beer and he would get mad. He'd yell at trees and shit. He was so transparent and open emotionally. He was the real deal human. He didn't try to suppress his feelings in any way or form. And then during that period of time, he had done an interview and he said, Tracii Guns has been coming up to the house, man, he's a cool guy. And, that was a big boost for me, just from him saying that in this one interview. And, so I go up there one day and I was looking at his super leads, he still had them, and he had just got like the new PV 5152, like some other upgrade of his amp. And he's like, man, you got to check this one out. Da, da, da. So I brought my Charvel up. I had a real early Charvel. Looks like the futon I'm playing right now. It's like crimson red, 2 pickups, Floyd, like really, really solid guitar. I brought that up there. And,
this episode is brought to you by Google. The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. The U.S. Department of Transportation is empowering staff with Google AI tools to rapidly synthesize research and streamline contracting, directly strengthening the safety and reliability of our nation's transit systems. This is a new era of American innovation. Learn more at g.co/American innovation.
This summer, serve up the Cookout Classics, Kraft Mayo and Dressing. Toss green salads with delicious ranch dressing or zesty Italian. Serve smooth, craveably creamy potato salads with mayo. We all know it's not a cookout without Kraft.
This summer, say I do.
I am marrying a stranger.
Like never before.
Am I crazy?
It's a whole new Married at First Sight on Peacock.
Thank God I woke up in love.
With new experts.
My name is Dr. Lisa.
My name is Paul Brunson.
More couples.
This could be the start of a very successful marriage.
And more surprises.
Or maybe not.
Everything is just not enough.
You're a little bit crazy.
I don't know what's gonna happen. I want my fairy tale ending.
Married at First Sight, now streaming. New episodes Thursdays, only on Peacock.
You know, I said, hey, man, you know, thanks for fucking talking about me in that article, man. That was like really unexpected. And I didn't know you felt that way about my guitar playing. He goes, oh, you're a killer, man. You know, he's like so generous that way. You know, just like, you're a fucking killer. And so we plugged my Charvel into the new amp. And he's like, oh, what are those pickups? You know, like, I think they're Seymour Duncan's. You know, those fucking sound great. You know, and so he put one of his guitars on, and I started playing some Eddie Van Halen shit, you know. He goes, why do you always do that? I want to hear your shit. You always mock me, and now you're at my house and you're mocking me. I'm not mocking you. You know what I mean? What do you mean I'm mocking you? He goes, come on, man. You know, so he was a little sensitive about that. You know, like maybe he'd let you get away with it once. You know what I mean? But don't play my shit in front of me, you know, kind of thing. And anyways, that the head sounded fucking killer, and he had it plugged in to two Marshall like old basket weave cabinets in this little room. It wasn't in the main studio room. It was like in a little isolation booth. We just sat there dicking around on the guitar, tweaking the amp for a while. And I thought to myself, hey, you know, you got a bunch of Marshalls still, right? And he's like, yeah, I love them, man. He goes, but I just can't get out of them what I need now. And I'm like, wow. I was thinking, and I had a Super Lead and a Plexi in my living room at home that I bought just kind of as an investment, you know, and because I never really used non-master volume Marshalls live. I couldn't afford them. I did when I was in Guns N' Roses, like when I was really young. I had them. They were cheap at the time, but I got some mint ones in like 91, 92 or something. Anyways, so I leave that day, and we're playing golf the next day. So I decided, cause he hooked me up with the PV guys to get amps and guitars and shit. Can't remember that guy's name. He was real nice. But, so Eddie was being very generous. Like, that was the question you asked. You know, he's like, hey man, you know, the guys at PV love you, man. They want, you know, let's get you hooked up and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wow, okay. Like, this is happening. You know, Ed talks about me to Mag, being generous, giving me the stuff. So next morning I threw those two Marshalls in the trunk of my car, and, it's early, man, like, you know, 8 in the morning. I'm over there, and, he walks out of the house. And he goes, hey, how you doing, man? You ready? And I'm like, oh, man, I got a stomach ache, but yeah, you know, let's fucking do this, you know. I go, do me a favor. Can you grab my clubs out of the trunk of the car? And he just looked at me like I was speaking Chinese. It's like, what? I go, yeah, man, my stomach, you know, can you just do me that favor? Just grab my bag out of the thing. I go, it's open. And you know, it was a little walk, like, you know, 100 steps from where we were to my car. He's like, yeah, I guess, whatever, dude. Okay. And he opens the trunk and he sees the two Marshalls. He goes, how am I supposed to get these clubs with these fucking Marshalls in the way? And I'm like, those are yours. He goes, what? I go, I brought those for you. He's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. We didn't play golf that day. You know, grabbed the Marshalls. We brought them up there. And that was really the first day I ever knew how to, make a plexi work, because in my living room, I could turn them up to 3 and they just sounded like clank, 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 clank. And he's like, no, man, you just crank them all the way up and turn the bass off, man, stick your guitar in it. I was like, holy fucking shit. Like right there, that was it. And it wasn't that loud. It's like they're louder when they're not cranked because they're letting all this, they're not compressed yet. The tubes aren't compressed. But when you crank them, they get nice and smooth and they get that distortion, that kind of brown sound that everybody describes Eddie's sound as. And he's like, oh, these are perfect. And I'm like, they're yours. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, man, fuck it. I don't know what the fuck I was using. I think I had a bunch of PBs coming or something. And so, I felt like being generous back because that's how generous he was. I didn't want to feel like I was, taken from the guy, I didn't want to be that guy. So we ended up with those. And then we kind of didn't talk for a few months. And he was trying to mix, I think it was Live Without a Net, one of the Sammy live records. I guess that was it. And I was in Vegas with my girlfriend, Kristen. And we get home and she listens to the answering machine and it's Eddie. And it's, she's like, Eddie called, very passively. I'm like, every time that motherfucker would leave a message on my machine, I was instantly 12 years old on that school bus coming down from summer camp, like, oh man, what does he want, man? All right, cool. Fucking, I listened to the message and he's like, I'm in the studio. I need you up here. And I'm like, oh fuck. So I called and he's like, hey, I'm with, Biff from the Westwood One truck. I'm like, I know Biff, big, tall, super sarcastic engineer, has recorded everybody in that truck, chain smoking, fucking, listening to Eddie Van Halen come through, So I'm like, yeah. He goes, you did this King Biscuit Flower Hour, man. And we're trying to remember how you got your guitar to split like that. I'm like, oh shit. Okay. I'll be right up. And, we pull up, he had a cassette of it and I'm listening to it and I go, I know what we did. And he goes, okay, what'd you do? Because Eddie had recorded, whatever those recordings were in stereo, kind of like he had 2 guitar tracks, running simultaneously, he was playing through 2 amps. And, but what my recording sounded like was like, I had to simulate it because something happened in the recording where I would run 3 mics live, 3 amps live, and one of the mics was dead. And when we listened back to the recording, when we were mixing that thing, there was nothing on the track. And that was the track where I had my chorus pedal on, which created like a 3-dimensional kind of spatial sound live. And so what we had to do is I didn't have a chorus pedal in the Westwood One truck when we were mixing it, but he had a harmonizer. And I remember hearing Chris Holmes did this thing with a harmonizer. I'm like, you know what, man? Let's re-record the dry guitar on another track, and then we can put a harmonizer on it slightly out of tune, and that should have the chorus effect. Not only did it have the chorus effect, it really sounded fucking cool. It sounded better than the chorus thing. And I got that from Randy Rhoads because Randy Rhoads ran in stereo live. He had a MXR chorus pedal where it was dry on one side and the chorus went to the other side. That was Randy's live sound. That was my favorite sound. So I figured if I could just do delay on one side and chorus on one side and then the middle have a dry cabinet, that would be cool. And that's what I did on whatever fucking tour that was. And it sounded fat, sounded really good. And then I had the theremin running through a stereo delay through the other inputs of the amps. So it was a little bit sophisticated and a lot of crap to carry around, whatever. That was how it was back then. So anyways, I go up there and Biff's like, what do we do? And I go, this is what we did. And Eddie had 2 tracks recorded and I think he had like stereo delay. I think that was like what he was doing live then. Like he had a stereo delay sound. And so we took one of the tracks and they did it, and they did the harmonizer thing, and that kind of was Eddie's thing, like forever after that, just that big, nice sound. And you really hear it on the Sammy Hagar stuff, this like kind of chorus, sound, which wasn't my favorite Eddie sound for sure. I mean, I love the first 4 records, that fucking just beat you in the fucking head with the guitar sound, but that was our thing, we had trust and kind of mutual respect. And the last time I saw him was after he had hip surgery. I had just come home from tour. I think it was 95 or 96, just come off a tour, and someone had stolen all my CDs right off the front of the bus. You know how you used to have a big book and all your CDs would go in the book? Someone had just stolen it in Salt Lake City. Like, they must have just opened the bus door. It was right there and they took it. Like 150 CDs. So I was in Music Plus on Laurel Canyon, Ventura, and going to buy my first 2 CDs again, starting over. And I was with Kristen, and Eddie comes up behind me. He pulls on my shirt. He was on crutches. It's like, hey. I turn around, and him looked like he just had surgery, right? It's just like tired and out of it and on crutches. And what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I told him the story. Someone stole my CDs, and I gotta get this. I'll start over. What are you gonna get? And this is how you're gonna know what Eddie liked. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna get Van Halen 1. He laughed, and I go, I'm not kidding. I am getting Van Halen 1. Yeah, he goes, okay, fair enough. Fine. He goes, but what else are you gonna get? He goes, you're gonna get Randy Rhoads? Probably. He goes, okay, well, what about the real shit? What are you gonna get? What are you gonna get? I don't know, man. What do you suggest? He goes, I know you love Page, man. I go, I know you love Page, man. And we both look at each other. We go, Physical Graffiti. That was that defining, moment. Physical Graffiti coming out at the same time. So I did. I got Blizzard of Oz, Van Halen 1, and Physical Graffiti that day. And that was our mutual choice, And I knew that he was going to say that because there was he always had a copy of it's a double CD when you walked into 5150, like the little lobby area. He always had it out going through the stereo, one of the CDs or the other, That was like the first thing I ever noticed when I walked in there. That was the last time we hung out, and it was after that. And then, I talked to him a couple times, and, life does what life does, and that was it. And then, Adam Raver, F.U. Tone, real good friend of mine now for about 7 years. And he works with Matt Bruck and doing that stuff. And we started talking about Eddie again a couple of years before he died. And I thought Eddie's cancer was gone, And we were talking one day. He goes, Eddie's got the C again. And I'm like, wow, really? He goes, yeah, it's kind of weird. They seem to be tackling it. It seems to be going all right. And I'm like, well, that's good to hear. And then another year went by, and I brought it up. Like, hey, man, what's going up with that? What's going on with Eddie? He goes, well, now it's kind of like whack-a-mole. Like one comes up, they get rid of it. Time goes by, another one pops up. The tumors. And like, fuck, man. So we knew, it was a matter of time. And that was really sad. And I was over in Denmark, just had my kid over there. And I have a little band over there, and we rehearse in a music store. And we were rehearsing, and Kristen, my oldest son's mom, texted me over there, and she's like, hey, Eddie died. And I was like, whoa, hold on a minute. And I stopped practicing. I went downstairs and called her. I was like, what do you mean? She was like, he died of cancer, some hospital in Santa Monica or something. I'm like, wow. And I went upstairs and I told the guys, and Van Halen wasn't like a big touring band in Europe, especially in Denmark. And they're like, whoa, Eddie Van Halen died. They know who he is, obviously. But I'm like, yeah, and so we played for another like 2 or 3 minutes. I was like, you know what, guys, I got to call this. I got to go home, and I went home and my apartment was 8 flights upstairs. My kid was, like 6 months old, 7 months old. I get up there, man. It's like 10:30 at night. Baby's asleep. My wife's asleep. And I just start puking and shitting and like fucking, it hit me in such an intense, like illness kind of way, where it wasn't even emotional. It was like someone was pounding on my body. I slept on the bathroom floor that night, and I told my wife when she woke up at like, 3 a.m, she's like, what are you doing? Are you okay? And I told her, Eddie Van Halen died, and I guess this is my reaction to, I don't know what's going on. And, then the next day I just remember, being in Denmark, it's real cloudy and, kind of windy, and we had, skylight on the roof of our apartment, and I was just looking at it and I was just realizing that, somebody that powerful of an influence on the entire rock scene, influenced every guitarist. And I don't give a fuck what anybody says. If you're over 35 years old and you play electric guitar, you're influenced by Eddie Van Halen, either directly or indirectly, period. His reach was so far. It's not even up for debate, and, so processing that, and talking to Adam Raver, that day when I woke up, and he kind of let me know all the inside of what went on and everything. I was like, wow, and I know how upset, Al, and, Valerie and Wolf, it's just so hardcore, so traumatic, such a bringer of reality, to people that were close to him and his fans, my friend Caleb, who, Caleb, plays, I've never heard anybody play Eddie like that. Caleb is the guy, the Nerd Halen guy. That's what Caleb does. And when Caleb comes over and plays that Eddie stuff, man, it's just like, fuck, man, like, how do you do that? Cause I never tried to play like Eddie. He's had such a specific thing. And when I hear my friend Caleb play, it just brings it all back, right away. Just like, man, so cool. And Pete Thorne too, man. He plays that Eddie stuff like it's nobody's business. And, and it's funny that we're doing this because, this year is the year where I've been feeling his loss. I've been feeling the loss of Eddie Van Halen. I think about him all the time. I drive by his street all the time, and every time I do, I think about him, and inevitably, a Van Halen song comes on the radio, within 10 minutes. It's just very strange, but, it's a hardcore loss, man. It's like for real, like Eddie Van Halen is gone and Jeff Becker gone.
Yeah.
It's like no more. There's no more new music. There's no more going to see those guys fuck around on their guitars and just do the coolest fucking shit in the world, But yeah, I miss him. I loved him, still love him. Love his family. I hope that they're healing, and I hope that they're, in it and grieving properly, and, and I know they are.
I bring up George Lynch again. I was talking to him earlier this year, and he mentioned there are times where he just stops and can't believe that he's gone.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe that. It's, George in a way probably knew Eddie a lot better than I did. I don't know if they were ever friends, but they certainly played in the same music scene, so I would imagine if you're having a friendly competition in your music scene and one of those guys is Eddie Van Halen, that it makes a big impact on you. You know what I mean? And so I can imagine, and I know George pretty well, for his sarcasm and quirkiness and George Lynch isms. He's a nice guy.
Yes.
Like he's a sensitive guy. He's an emotional guy and a great player. And that's why he's a great player, because he's all those human qualities. So I can picture George just stopping in his tracks, just thinking about a fleeting moment of Eddie Van Halen, That's
when you think of Eddie now, like what's the memory that comes back to you? Is it the golfing? Is it the amps that you gave him? What is it?
There's multiple Eddies when I think about Eddie, and I think that this is going to sound weird. When he was going through his cancer treatment the first time, I was driving on the 101, and I saw him speeding to the right of me in his black Mercedes, and he looked like he wasn't in a good mood. Like that, I don't know why that always, maybe because it was a surprise, to see him. But I always think about him flying down the ramp at the Forum, and I think about that weird Mercedes thing, and then I get past that, and it's like, I remember this one time, we were playing golf, and it was so fucking windy. I think it was at Braemar, which is kind of in the Malibu Hills, sort of. It was so windy, and I was wearing shorts. I was freezing my ass off. And we kept trying to get over this, like it wasn't even 80 yards, man. We were just trying to get over this water thing. And we just couldn't do it because of the wind. And first we were laughing, and then we were all angry, and then we all said, fuck it, and just walked over and started. I don't know why, but that's the most intense moment. And him looking at, I remember I got my Killing Machine tattoo on my leg, and he didn't have a tattoo yet. And he goes, what's that? I go, that's the Killing Machine logo. He goes, oh, that's right. He goes, why'd you get that tattooed on your body? Like, that's your side project. That's not even your main band. like, yeah, you're right. Whatever. Then he got like an Amsterdam tattoo or something. But yeah, I don't know, man. I got a lot of memories. Good guy.
Thinking back of when you were coming up and how he mentioned you in that article, which, did wonders for you. After he came and after he became this presence in mainstream music and all the bands in Hollywood were coming up, right? I mean, they're the ones that started that Sunset Strip, the Van Halen playing the Troubadour and, what's the one? Was it, Gazzari's?
Gazzari's, yeah.
Yeah. All those places. What was it like kind of coming up in his shadow as a new guitar player with all these other guitar players?
I was fucking glad he was gone. I was glad that he was making records and playing, fucking arenas, and, he was legit. And I still felt like a child, because not only was his presence felt in all the clubs and everything, but like his picture was on the side of Gazzari's, so, he was a god and I was mortal. Right. And that's what you want. You don't want to be in a music scene, with a guy that's, immortal or God. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, okay. Randy and Eddie, they moved on. They're rocking. They're doing their shit. I don't have to compete with Mick Mars. I don't have to compete with Warren DeMartini or George. All those bands are gone. And then it was just me and Guns N' Roses and LA Guns and Cece, who was a fucking brilliant guitar player. And who else was around? There was a guy named Dennis Chick that was really good, but they never went anywhere, whatever band he was in. And, yeah, I don't really know. Right in our time, Dave Navarro was in James. But I think, on a traditional kind of guitar wheedly level, I think, Slash and I were kind of the last guys, so, and we grew up together. So it wasn't like, I didn't give a shit. He didn't give a shit. We just did our thing, but we didn't have any super monster shredder guys to be bothered with when we were doing our thing. It was just like, I did my best. He did his best, and we both did fine. And, but then again, yeah, Navarro, definitely Navarro. And then Frusciante, when he joined the Peppers, he was a big force, still is. I love that guy. But George was already on his way, doing his shit with Dokken and then Cece. Cece was my other favorite guitarist, in LA at that time.
Is there, outside of Eruption, I should preface that, outside of Eruption, is there a riff, is there a solo that for you defines Eddie?
That's a tough question, man. Fucking Atomic Punk, man. Ice Cream Man and Atomic Punk. Brutal. Just fucking dark energy fire, man. Like, wow. That Atomic Punk solo, I do know how to play that one. But it's so furious, and that crazy chromatic run at the end, which just sounds so beautiful, but makes no musical sense at all. But it makes sense right there. If you try to figure it out in a scale, from a musical kind of perspective, what you learned in class, you ain't going to get it. So like those things, but there's also stuff on the fourth album where he was being a little tricksy. I guess you could call it the Alan Holdsworth era, where he's doing some different stuff, with harmonics and his very rhythmic solo style. But to me, really with him, it's just knowing that that's him playing. You always knew it was Eddie playing. It didn't matter, if Roth was singing or not. He just does it, and you're like, that's Eddie Van Halen. So, but yeah, there's those few things that really do stick out for me. Maybe because I'm more into the dirty side of guitar playing, and those are the things that are fucking Ice Cream Man solo. Oh my God. Yeah, I just think, it's funny when I hear that, I think of myself in the Guns N' Roses studio, which was behind Guitar Center. And I used to just jam in there all the time when we didn't rehearse. And, I would always try to expand blues progressions, and soloing, to that really weird 5-fret spread. And it just always instantly sounds like Ice Cream Man. It's just like, but I don't recall anybody ever doing anything like that before Ice Cream Man with blues in the solo section. It's just like, whoa, where are you going? And you hear all those weird notes. Those work.
I always appreciate too the bottoms up, because it's in essence,
solo, though.
It's an essence of it's a tribute to Billy Gibbons and LaGrange. It's just so like.
It's got a little jazz run in it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's killer. Yeah. Yeah, no, he was very much into Gibbons, wasn't he?
Yeah.
When you really look at it. And I think that's where a lot of the sense of humor of Van Halen probably is inspired, just from ZZ Top. Now that you put it that way. They were funny guys. They're still funny guys. Roth is out of his mind. I just love watching him now. It's like, wow, you were always for real, man.
His David Lee Roth show is, man, like it is layer upon layer of just like it blows your mind watching that stuff. Like,
what does he do? Like,
his perspective is just
yeah, no, incredible. I know. I see clips, I try not to pay attention to anything anymore about anybody, but I do go on Twitter and I see little bits and pieces here and stuff. And, I'm trying to fight the good fight because I got kids, that's what I mostly do. But now Roth he was never faking it, was he?
No.
He's always that guy. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny Roth story really quick. I was at the Troubadour. I was about 15 or 16. they had their motorcycles parked right in front of the True, right in the red. And I see him sitting in the back of the bar, and I walk up, really innocently. I'm like, hey, I just wanted to meet David Lee Roth, right? Yeah. And he's like, yeah. I walked away. He wasn't being friendly to me. So I'm standing outside. I probably had like lipstick on or something. You know what I mean? I was that age, 15, watching Motley Crue. And then the tow truck pulls up. They're about to put the bikes on the flatbed tow truck. So I walk back in and I'm like, hey. He's like, yeah, kid. I'm like, they're going to tow your motorcycles. He's like, oh, fuck. And then they got up. That's how I met Roth. That was my first encounter with Roth. Yeah, at the Trube. Man, it seems like yesterday. It's crazy.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, doing these conversations every year about Eddie, it really is, because I think music fans and musicians all mourn Eddie because he was a part of all of us. And obviously he wasn't a family member, but his music and his just influence on our lives just meant so much. And like you said, when you got ill, when he passed, I remember I was making breakfast in the kitchen and my son came in. He's like, Dad, Eddie Van Halen died. And I'm like, you better not be joking. Don't be joking like about that. And he's like, no, I'm serious. And I just turned off the oven. I went in my room and I just cried.
Yeah.
And
what do you do?
Yeah. And then as I came out of it, I hear from my son's bedroom, because I bought him a CD player and a bunch of CDs, playing Van Halen 1, playing Eruption. And I'll never forget that moment and just being numb for like a couple weeks after that. Yeah.
It's really phenomenal because he had a celebrity appeal to the public beyond his guitar playing. Like once you knew he was the man, it didn't matter if you played guitar or not. It was like, oh, that's Eddie Van Halen. Look at that guy. Yeah. He's got a nice smile, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And, but of course his impact on music, but here's one of the things that I always encourage people to do to realize how fantastically human he was as a guitar player. When you watch him do like jamming with other guys, like at the NAMM show and stuff, all those videos are on YouTube. And, you realize for 5 minutes that he's just a human, because he fucks up and does a terrible tone and, plugging into this and that. And, but when he does his thing, he's immortal, but I always loved his human side because I knew him personally, and his human side was, even though he's from the Netherlands, but he's a Valley boy, man. He's a Valley kid, and, for those couple of years we were hanging around, I always had some kind of baggy shorts on and like a Hawaiian shirt and, smoking cigs, talking shit, funny as hell, And his voice, hey, he just had this voice, like, what are you doing? Come over here. Stop it. Like just like your dude bro friend, he wasn't like, I'm friends with Vi too, but Vi is very eloquent, like he's very, soft and funny and, puts his intelligence first when he speaks, and stuff like that. Where Eddie was just like a fucking spark plug, man. Loved him. Miss him bad.
Well, Tracii, thank you very much for the time and thank you very much for the conversation. This was absolutely wonderful to talk to you about Eddie and share your thoughts and your stories. It was way more than I can imagine.
Oh man. Yeah, no, the pleasure was all mine, believe me, because, like I said, I miss the guy. I love the guy. Only had great experiences with him. Love what he did for the world, and his memory will live on like a Beethoven, man. It will forever. We'll talk again.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. Everyone, that's Tracii Guns from LA Guns. Thanks for tuning in and listening to this special episode about celebrating Eddie Van Halen. And of course, I'm Jay Scott. This is The Hook Rocks, the ultimate rock community podcast. Take care of each other, stay safe, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Summer is calling, and your favorite artists are at Wolf Trap. Tickets on sale at wolftrap.org.
To kids, summer isn't just time off. It's time spent building confidence and curiosity. But when school meals pause, millions of kids lose access to the food they count on during the school year. As a neighbor-led network, Feeding America is deeply rooted in every community, ensuring summer meals continue nourishing growth and potential. Your support puts healthy food within reach, fueling the future for kids and their families. Give now at feedingamerica.org/summerhunger.
Ouch. This knee is killing me, but I can't stop training. The marathon is in 2 weeks.
Let's get on ZocDoc and find a doctor to take a look at that for you.
Okay.
Here's a review. Dr. Craddock really takes his time.
No, I don't have time.
What about Dr. Charles? His patients say he can help find a quick fix, and he's in network.
Great, now we're talking. Book it.
Booked. 1 mile down, 19 to go.
Bring it on.
You've got options. Download the ZocDoc app today.